Content warning. This story contains descriptions of violence against animals and disturbing imagery. If that may be upsetting to you, please stop now. I'm going to ruin one of the most wholesome places on Earth for you. We do storm checks every week. We've handled floods, torn branches, power hiccups. Nothing in those lists prepared me for that night. I'm a zookeeper. I study behavior. I read signals animals give off the way other people read faces. So when I tell you what I saw, please hear me. I knew the difference between an animal and something else pretending to be one. My name isn't important. Use whatever name keeps you comfortable. But I worked nights at the city zoo for 4 years before I transferred to days because I couldn't keep sleeping after certain shifts. At the time of this story, I'd been the lead night keeper for the ungulates and big cats on the east sector. I'd spent my 20s learning to read hoofbeats and lion breathing. I knew Pepper's body language the way a pilot knows the hum of an engine. Pepper was a middle-aged female zebra, a stubborn animal with a lip for treats and a habit of ignoring the boundary rope when she fancied something on the path. She was ours. In the rough sense, animals can be ours. Habituated, named, occasionally annoyed at human schedules. The storm came out of nowhere. Well, not nowhere. The forecast had been ugly but manageable. Line of thunderstorms, high winds, heavy rain. We keep a rolling checklist for that kind of weather. Check generators, secure tool sheds, move susceptible animals to sheltered stalls, tape or remove any loose signage that could become lethal projectiles. Night protocols are different from days. We try to minimize staff in exposed areas and keep priority on the animals whose stress is most volume dependent. Primates, big cats, ungulates. At 3 in the morning, it looked like the sky itself had been ripped and stitched back wrong. Rain like a salt curtain, wind making the floodlights sway. The whole east side smelled like wet metal and manure. It's a smell you learn to separate into components in the job. Ammonia from cleaning, damp straw, the metallic tang that comes with animals in storm pressure. Tom Bartley, our night supervisor, had sent JJ and me out in twos. Tom kept more of the radio position and the generator checks. He'd been pushing fast that shift because the older fences on the perimeter had been slated for maintenance that week, and the crew hadn't shown. We joked briefly and without much feeling about the timing. Tom's voice on the radio was calm and clipped. He has that pragmatic way you want in a supervisor. Doesn't coddle and doesn't panic. JJ Wheeler is 28, practical with an owl's sense of oddness. Pragmatic but quick to notice irregularities. We'd worked night shifts together enough that we could move through a rain-blurred map without talking much. We started where we always did, the big cats holding lines. The lions are the easiest place to feel the storm's presence because of how sound travels over concrete and through their bodies. Even under tarped covers and behind reinforced gates, you can feel a low rumble. Not the thunder, but a sustained vibration from their chests when the pressure drops and they brace themselves. Caesar, our male, had a mane like an old coat, and on good nights he was grandeur wrapped in sinew. On other nights, grumpy and dominant. That night he was fixed. When we turned the corner toward the outdoor yard, JJ and I slowed without meaning to. The floodlights showed wet tracks and a rolling fog of spray from the rain. The lions were at their holding gates, not pacing at all. They were sitting in a row, all of them motionless, heads up, eyes focused on a patch of the zebra yard that at first glance held nothing but rain, and a handful of the long striped bales near the fence. There was a silence to it. Not the silence of a place emptied, but the unnatural silence of attention. The usual background of a zoo's nocturnal life. Distant monkeys, the creak of an old gate, the sudden flap of a crane, fell away. All that was left was the low, continuous rumble from the lions and the thrum of rain. We've had times when the animals will focus like that. A stray raccoon near the staff door, a fox scent carried over the wall can hold the cat's attention for long minutes. But this look was different. It wasn't hunting focus. It was something colder, an arrested attention as if they'd recognized an anomaly they didn't have the cognitive equipment to name. Their eyes were all locked on the same point, and their ears weren't twitching with the wind. They were still, pupils narrower than I'd expect in that light. Caesar's tail lay limply over his paws instead of flicking the way a cat's tail does when it's considering action. I remember thinking, in the clipped professional way we learn on the job, that I should log this in the incident notebook, that we should get the guard dog on perimeter rounds increased. Instead, JJ walked up to the observation rail, peering through the rain as if he could find precisely what their stillness was staring at. He muttered under his breath, something about not normal, and that, more than anything, made a cold pool open behind my ribs. We did the rounds as per protocol. A quick visual sweep, secure the gates, radio check with Tom, and then head to Sector 7 for a scheduled perimeter inspection. That fence had been patched too many times. It had been a maintenance item in Tom's last briefing. The storm had been worse than predicted, and an older anchor point on the eastern barbed wire had taken the brunt. We found the fence down where the ground had softened, and a support post had been wrenched free like a tooth. There were ragged edges of wire and a tuft of hair snagged on the bent metal, dark and matted with rain. My hands went numb under the gloves, not from cold, but because the hair had the coarse feel of equid mane, and the hair's patterning caught in the strobe of my flashlight. We immediately ran numbers. What could have gotten through a break like that, and where could it have gone? A zebra could go through, but so could a smaller animal drawn by chance. The logical chain was straightforward enough. We lock and shelter animals first, then staff inspect the breach, then call maintenance. But while we were making radio calls, JJ stood with his flashlight trained on the downed fence, like he expected the thing that caused it to still be there, painting light over mud tracks that were mostly hoof-shaped and led toward the zebra paddock. Pepper's stall was supposed to be secure behind a double gate and a small inner holding enclosure. When we opened the outer gate, the smell hit me first. Circled damp straw, tracks of hooves across the concrete. The inner gate clicked, and the stall, Pepper's stall, was empty. Her halter hung from the hook where it always did, but the concrete where she usually slept showed no shaped outline. There were no drag marks, no blood, no broken fence at the stall itself. Her feed tub was overturned, some pellets scattered and sodden. For a second, the pragmatic part of my brain worked through alternatives. Maybe she was in the small holding paddock. Maybe the storm had spooked her into the service corridor. Maybe somebody had opened an exterior gate. JJ and I split to check the yard and adjacent corrals like a rehearsed motion. The rain spooled down our jackets. We shined lights across the lower yard. There, near the fence that used to be down, a zebra stood perfectly still in the open field, not grazing, not pacing, not aware of the wind raking across its stripes. It just stood, side on, with its legs planted square as a statue. For a moment I thought we had found Pepper. The markings looked like hers from the wet glare, an odd kink at the right flank, a little scar near a shoulder. My chest unclenched and then tightened. The animal's head was turned slightly down toward the ground. It seemed to be looking back at the hole where the fence had been torn. A slow scene, a logical resolution to the earlier chaos. I moved closer. In my years I've learned the deceptive ways of prey animals coming into my space. A startled horse can bolt. A zebra can panic and injure itself on fencing. My approach was deliberate. Low steps, voice soft, not reaching for a treat. Because surprise, not predator dominance, is often the difference between containment and calamity. The zebra stared at me for a long, thin moment. And then, as if making a choice, it turned and moved back toward the barn in a gait that looked, in fragments, like Pepper's habitual strut. We followed it through the gate and into stall 4 where Pepper usually slept. The animal slipped through the inner gate and, here's the thing, began to behave in a way Pepper always had. It nosed the corner of the stall, flattened ears when we moved too quickly, took its feed without startling, and shifted its weight from side to side as if settling on hay. It blinked in the sterile feed light in the same rhythm Pepper did when thinking of treat time. JJ, who'd been riveted, let out a breath that might have been a laugh or a sound between relief and disbelief. I felt the thin membrane of control loosen. Part of me allowed the normalcy to stitch back a little, like putting a bandage over a cut and telling myself it's fine. Except cameras don't lie in the ways we do, and my hands had barely reached for the stall bolt when the rational part of my mind demanded we check the security feed. We went to the watch station near Equine Alley. The monitors blinked with the standard overlay of cameras. Gate 1, Gate 2, zebra yard, and stall 4 feed. There was grain, there was rain, there were timestamps. On the monitor, the zebra was in its stall at every timestamp, calm, eating, everything in the right place. The monitor showed no footage of the animal standing outside, no footage of a fence torn down and tufted hair. The camera that should have been pointed at the breach had fogged, time-stamped as active, but showed only static and rain streaks. The angle that would have caught someone moving along the fence line was a smear of black and white. Weird, JJ said, but he was quieter. The way his voice dropped made me aware that something more than equipment was wrong. We rewound, checked alternate feeds. Nothing. The only evidence that contradicted the monitors were our own wet footprints and the line of hoof impressions leading from the broken fence to the stall. Impressions that matched Pepper's shoeing pattern, as much as a hoofprint can be matched. When you work with animals, you build this tacit hierarchy of trust. The live animal's behavior sits above other evidence in your gut, because we spend our days reading muscle memory and ear positions. Cameras record one slice. Eyes, ears, and scent give you the other. On that rain-slicked concrete, both sets were telling us different things. Either someone had moved Pepper and staged her return in the stall, which felt wrong and violent to even propose, or something else had moved through the fence and back in a way that cameras didn't record. Tom advised us over the radio to close down the yard and wait for maintenance. He kept his voice professional, but there was an edge. Companies and municipalities hate unspooled anomalies in media logs, and Tom knew the work it would cause. He told us to log it and to keep the animal separated from public access. We did. We locked the gates and eased Pepper, if it was Pepper, into the inner holding, where she continued to chew at the hay like someone who had used up the trauma and moved onto a habit. We wrote the incident number in the log. We took photographs of the hoof prints and of the fence. The maintenance ticket was open. On paper, the event had a place and the chain of custody checks were followed. On the ground, however, we felt watched. The lion's stare had long since broken into nervous pacing, and when we glanced back through the rain toward their enclosure, their eyes slid over us like liquid heat. That's where the first real fracture happened. Later, back on the main staff corridor, JJ stopped dead and stared at me. "You were in the cat corridor, man," he said. "You waved at me. You waved like that." He made a small, half-lifted gesture that was mine, exact and personal. He'd been 2 yards ahead of me and said he saw the back of my head and my right hand raised as if in mid-wave. I hadn't waved. I was standing at the stall bolt with both hands on the latch when he said he saw me. I told him that, and his face closed in on itself like something you'd pack into a small box and try to leave in the dark. We both know how human perception can be faulty late at night, how fatigue and repetition manufacture images. But JJ is not the kind to invent seeing colleagues in corridors. He's the kind who carries mental accounting of who did what and when. He replayed it, slow and exact, telling me what I was wearing. Jacket up to a certain notch, headlamp reflection, and I could feel the hairs rise on the back of my neck. My training kept me logical. I asked him to name a detail that only I would make. The way I habitually looped my radio cord over my shoulder, the limp in my left shoe because a nail had once gone through the sole. He knew those small things. He described the limp. We checked the corridor camera. The footage was a shallow wash of green in night mode, and for a beat it showed me. No, it didn't. It showed a figure in a jacket with a headlamp moving through the corridor, hand raised in a wave. There, on the screen, was the movement JJ had described. Yet my memory placed me in the stall, both hands on the latch, feeling the metal cool under the rain. We cross-referenced timestamps against our logs. The timeline left threads that didn't all knit. The camera placed me in 2 spots separated by seconds, places I'd physically been unable to occupy. We rewound, slowed, advanced. The video frames unspooled the same impossible paradox. Feed time on the monitor and my hands at the stall were documented. The recording left me in no room for linear explanation. We tested each other in small, childish ways I'd never have suggested in training. Call and response nicknames that only we used, inside jokes, the way I'd slap my hand on the rail when closing a stall. JJ called to me with something I called in ordinary human cadence. "Hey, Sparks!" My nickname and the corridor feed had shown me respond. On the monitor, my response was full-bodied and natural. In the stall, my feed of the same second was raw and real. Human cognition doesn't like simultaneous contradictory evidence. It classically chooses the simpler explanation: faulty recording, mis-synced cameras, or, if you live in institutions long enough, human error and small explainable lapses. Still, as the storm flattened the days into a single long night, and our headphone chatter looped around 3 different backup channels, a deeper unease took root. It wasn't just that the cameras contradicted us. It was a feeling that the zoo's borders, physical and procedural, had been brushed in a way that suggested a player with knowledge of our rhythms. Whoever or whatever had moved through the fence moved with an attention to how we operate. If this were a human punching hole in a perimeter, the motive felt absent. Nothing had been stolen. No feed bins were raided. The stall halter remained. There were no footprints leading away beyond the hoof prints. If a person had retrieved Pepper and returned her, why leave the halter and why clean nothing? The discrepancy was a hollow answered by nothing. That night, to my surprise and to my professional embarrassment, I found myself arguing with JJ about whether to call in the police. Protocol says if an asset is compromised, you document and escalate. The police would write a report, maybe send officers to tape off the breach, make it an incident. Tom, who'd returned after checking the generator room, laughed once, too short, and said we should wait until daylight because at 3 a.m., officers would be thin, and this might be something an animal control unit could handle better. He said, plausible animal escape, said we shouldn't make a media incident out of a fence post until maintenance had inspected. He was trying to make the situation administratively quiet. His attempt at steadiness felt less like authority, and more like a politeness meant to soothe the keening. We wrote our notes and then moved into the unnatural business of routine in an abnormal night. Lots of small checks, a continuous presence to reassure ourselves that systems still worked. We kept an eye on the zebra stall through the glass. Pepper, if that was her, slept with her nose in a bundle of hay that now had a varnish of rain grit. She looked to clients or to the casual observer, like every other reassured animal. I know better. I watched for signs you can't fake. Dark stress sweat in the groin hair, the tiny lateral swish of the tail indicating annoyance, the tick of an ear muscle when someone counted down the seconds to an event. She did the staccato blink of an habituated animal. She did not, in those first hours, show large signs of panic, which made what JJ told me next even stranger. He said quietly as we walked back past the big cats to the staff room that he'd seen me again, this time in the service corridor opposite the primate house. He said it was like watching the back of my head fade into the shadow. He told me that the figure had looked up and smiled, and that the smile had been wrong in a way he couldn't place until later. JJ's voice broke on that word. He used wrong, but not to mean malicious necessarily. More like that something had tried to fold a familiar shape and gotten the seams sort of misaligned. We crossed the primate house entry in the dark without using the flashlight because the primates hate sudden light. Their eyes, in the small glow, looked panicked and bright. They sounded off, short, distressed calls, not because we were there but because the atmosphere was thick, and their cages register anomalies like barometers. One of the small capuchins pressed its weight against the back of the cage and kept reaching toward the sky with the same single arm, as if expecting someone to pull them up. JJ pointed that out without saying why. It was a small detail that made the hairs along my jaw lift. The primate's motion was specific, as if it had seen something mimic a human reach. We tried to argue it away, courtesy of a night's excess of the storm's sensory tiredness of primate chatter, but the pattern threaded through our night like a single thin seam. Animals fixated. Cameras showed normal footage. Staff saw duplicates. The fence had been breached, and then the zebra was where it should be, behaving like a zebra ought to behave, but something in the in-between was being withheld from our instruments. It was around 5 o'clock, with dawn still an hour off, that the voice started. We'd retreated to the utility yard partly to warm up, and partly to let things simmer. JJ and I were sharing a thermos of coffee that had long since lost the appeal of taste. My hands shook when I held it, not from cold but from the adrenaline that loops in a zookeeper's chest when an animal's territory is compromised. We were mid-argument about whether to walk the perimeter again, when the radio cut to a lower, thinner channel, and the space around the lion holding seemed to condense. The rain tapered from curtain to a steady slow drum as the storm passed, but the background sounds became clearer, metal settling, the distant hum of the generator, and under them something else threaded in. A voice. It came from the direction of the lion holding, a light child's voice calling a name. At first I thought it was a recording someone had left behind, a prank, some device someone had set up to mimic our voices. It sounded so ordinary it became uncanny, small, plaintive, and too carrying for the thick air. It said, plain as a bell, "Pepper," just like a child calling a pet. The syllables landed with that peculiar softness that only a human voice can provide, a kind of timbre you can't mistake for an animal. Except the sound had a second layer to it, something old and wrong, and beneath the child's pitch. It was like a second throat harmonizing on the same word, an undertone that peeled the child's innocence like bark from a tree. If the voice intended to call the zebra, it used a child's cadence with something layered under it that made the name drag. The lion stiffened at the sound and stared at the holding gate, as if the name had peeled back a seam in the air. They didn't roar, they didn't charge, they sat and hummed with contained tension. Their muscles tensed and then relaxed in a movement I know well, the motion of waiting on decisions. "That isn't a recording," JJ whispered. His breath fogged out. We both knew what we heard, and our training told us not to get closer to the big cats when something unnerving happened. Tom's voice came through the handset then, sharp and efficient. "Stay outside the perimeter, 2-man rule." He sounded less sure, but he said it because that's what management does, assert the rule in the face of thin certainty. The voice called again, the child's voice saying, "Pepper." And then a few seconds later there was a croak of something older nested beneath it like a second voice answering the first. It was a swallow of a sound, cramped and husky. The sound wasn't simply layered. It was like a translation, tiny and then older at the same time. I felt a pressure in my sinuses like the air itself was learning to speak with 2 mouths. We did what all good staff do in these moments. We did not move toward the sound. We kept our distance and radioed the other teams. Tom instructed avoidance. Maintenance arrived with chains and torches. We kept eyes on the lions who were now arranged in a chorus of attentive stillness, the kind of attention that reads, presentiment, on an animal's face. Pepper remained in her stall, eyes half-lidded, ears flicking less than an inch, when the voice threaded the space. But animals don't make layered human voices. People leave recordings. People stage things. People pretend. That is possible. Later we would enumerate every plausible explanation and rank them. At 3 a.m, the only immediate truth sitting in our bodies was that a child's voice echoed across the holding, and the lions tracked it like a scent across a wind. It was nothing like the zoo public's gentle facsimiles of drama. No speaker left with a child's recording. No prankster. No sympathetic urban explorer with a speaker. We checked the nearest speaker housings, the audio wirings. They were dead, waterlogged, or absent. Someone on the perimeter radio said they had run the camera archive, and the audio channels were either muted or clean. Nothing had recorded that layered voice the way our ears had. It sat only in our hearing like a ghost recording our own fear. We stood there for a long minute, keeping distance as smoke would keep fire from leaping. JJ kept whispering again about the corridor sighting. Tom, pragmatic, suggested we hold our posts until day, and to escalate the whole thing. He insisted we log it, a thing that calms institutional bodies, to reduce the night into a paper trail that can be examined by daylight minds. We did. We wrote down the name Pepper, and the strange voice description, and we sent someone to the perimeter to ring the area for prints and devices. The man who went to check the fence came back with nothing but extra mud on his boots and a look like someone who'd been asked to examine a picture and found that the picture looked at him. No speakers, nothing, he said. "Just the tracks, your hoof prints, and the torn fence." Tom said we should consider the possibility of someone playing games, some outside human with a taste for terror. He ran through a list of local teens and orbiters who'd been known to creep the perimeter, a familiar script in supervisors' heads, but his voice trailed off on the likelihood. At some point, because we have loyalties to animals, and to the idea that everything can be contained with enough hands, JJ and I gathered a small team and went back toward the zebra stall to watch. We weren't going to provoke anything. We were there to hold presence. Animals notice presence. Presence soothes them at basic levels. Presence also provides witnesses. We sat in our damp jackets in a small cluster on the outer service lane, eyes on the stall glass. The zoo around us reduced to the hum of a generator and the wet tick of runoff. The child voice called once more, softer, like someone experimenting with the shape of a name. The lions sat like sculptures, and the whole world felt thin. I remember thinking at that moment about the weirdness of expertise. Your work trains you to interpret signals and to accept discomfort as data, but it does not train you for the way the heart will behave when patterns it trusts are interrupted by a seam you cannot fix. We decided to pull back to a small, well-lit clearing off the service road, not because the night's rationality told us to, but because the body seeks a place with fewer walls when something unnameable pricks the skin. We planned to wait out the night there, watch the cameras and not enter any enclosure unless daylight gave us the comfort of volume. Tom agreed, reluctantly, that this was prudent. He radioed that we were maintaining observation from outside the perimeter. He repeated the word observation, as if the word could be a shield. But standing there with the rain passing and the zoo breathing around us, I realized none of the usual safety measures felt like a net. The cameras, our ironclad eyes, had betrayed us in the ways that matter. They had recorded Pepper in place and failed to record a presence outside. JJ, who shared a watch with me for months, had seen my shape moving in places I had not been in physical reality. The lions had fixated on a seam of air, and a voice had issued like a calling card sewn from two throats. All the institutional armor, documentation, chain of custody, protocols, felt suddenly like paper walls against something that did not respect linear rules. We moved there because we had to, because staying inside rummaged through the quiet of fear like a hand on a zipper. We took the thermos, the flashlights, the radios with the dry batteries. We kept our hands out in front of us like people who still believe they can feel ground and be anchored by it. When the voice came again, it was not just the childlike call. The second voice, old, low, incompatible, answered as if from behind a door. The lions lifted their heads simultaneously. For the first time since we'd noticed their stare, one of them yawned with the kind of gape that reveals too many teeth, and the movement was not a yawning surrender. It looked like a measuring. My mouth dried as I watched them size the air for teeth. We held our position. We radioed in and waited for dawn. In those hours, waiting with the generator's hum and the smell of wet straw, with animals breathing low and the occasional slap of rain from an eave, we were all trained humans stacked against mystery. But training is for known variables. What we were facing had, mercifully or not, no category on any checklist. I tried to tell myself later that the rest would reveal itself with light. I like light. Light fixes things in place. It gives you angles and textures and the ability to see seams you can't in the dark. For now, we did the only thing two practical men could do in the face of these mismatched proofs. We stayed put and watched. The zoo was awake in small anxious fits around us. The night held its breath, and somewhere within the collection of animal smells and overturned straw, the thing that had used a skin to move might have been listening back. If you're still with me after that warning, if you can stomach the thought of what comes next. One quick thing. If you like true-to-life horror told by people who know their work, consider subscribing. It helps keep the lights on for stories like this. We waited the rest of the night the way you wait in a tilting boat. With careful, brittle quiet. The generator hummed like a small animal chewing the darkness into a steady pattern. We rotated who watched the stall glass every 20 minutes, so someone was always awake to the animal and to the world beyond the fence. Dawn was a promise we told ourselves 100 times to keep from collapsing into the sort of speculative panic that tightens throats and makes rational people trade in superstition. The sky drained from bruised purple to a hammered gray. Rain tapered to a film on concrete. The zoo exhaled the wet smell of a place that had been scrubbed raw and left to air. In the pale smear of early light, I walked the path to the zebra yard twice, then 3 times, with JJ at my shoulder. We kept our voices low because the primates' calls had sounded ragged all night, and loud conversation only fed that energy. The lions, too, had settled into a wary lethargy, less the calm of contentment, and more the tired, watchful stillness of animals that had been made to wait for a decision they weren't allowed to make. Something moved along the tree line at first light. I noticed it because Caesar started to lift his head, and the other lions followed like a chain reaction. They all turned toward the same notch of trees that bordered the east sector like they had all night, that thin seam between the city and the zoo where broken glass and gossip collect. The movement was subtle, a darkness that slid like a hand pulling a blanket, but it was not animal. Its gait contradicted the expectation a zebra gives, the long-limbed rolling canter we study at parades, the thrown-out hind leg of a startled flight. This was wrong in small, telling ways. The hips moved with a stiffness I associate with something wearing a garment. The shoulders didn't roll the way equid shoulders do when they carry weight across soft ground. It moved with the careful economy of someone learning to fit a suit 2 sizes too big. It climbed the fence as if it had rehearsed the motion. Plant foot, hook, heave. A zebra doesn't climb. Zebras don't shimmy up chain link or vault fences. What climbed was the silhouette of a striped thing whose striping caught the low light and confused my eyes for a heartbeat. It was a patchwork of stripes that didn't settle right. The flank hung a fraction too loose, like a rug over a chair. It moved fluidly enough that for a second, my brain tried to reconcile it as animal. Then the tail swung wrong, the joints bent at an angle that belonged to someone else trying on another's limb. JJ whispered, "There." And the radio fell quiet, because between men who have watched animals long enough, the whisper does the job the shout would normally do. The creature hauled itself over the fence and dropped into the thin copse on the other side. It did not run like prey. It slipped away as if taking off a raincoat after a storm, methodical, practiced, without panic. We followed instinct more than plan. There was no point in a hero's charge. We were not equipped for confrontation. We picked our way to the fence and climbed through a maintenance opening where the barbed edge was folded back. The mud had fresh shoe impressions, human-sized shoe bottoms on the service path that led to a small break in the understory. The path sat like a scar. The grasses bent as if they had been flattened by a large, deliberate weight traveling toward the tree line. We moved toward the spot where the creature had vanished and found the leaves crushed with an ordered geometry, as if something had paused to check itself in the dark. I told Tom on the radio where we were, and he told us to hold. His voice quavered in a way I had not heard before. For the first time all night, I felt something like comprehension, too late, place itself in my chest. If whatever had been in the fence line could climb and move like that, whatever it had been wearing could be removed. The thought was a vertiginous one, like the sensation of standing at the lip of something too steep to look down into. It suggested a procedure, an intelligence, a decision. We returned to stall 4 to check Pepper. The stall door opened and the place looked like a stage after a scene change. The stall bedding had been pushed aside. Hay lay in a flattened circle. A heavy smell undercut the sweet hay scent, the metallic hint of something sterilized. And there, laid out on the straw like a rug someone might put down to respect a house guest, was a hide. It was unmistakably zebra skin, stretched and folded with a care that made my stomach drop. The stripes matched Pepper's pattern in places, enough to make us feel we were looking at a portrait. The skin had been peeled and removed with an economy that belonged to a person who knew how to cut along seams and avoid tearing. The incision was straight, surgical in its precision, an unbloody margin that suggested pangs of control. It lay cleanly, almost respectfully, on the stall floor. No gore spilled at the edge, no organs were visible. The smell was not of fresh blood but of something washed and left to dry. a faint chemical undertone that made JJ gag and step back. The immediate and practical reaction was the same as always. Secure the area, call it in, take photos. My hands moved on autopilot, gloves on, camera out, notes taken. The way we write helps us not lose our minds because it translates trauma into data points. We snapped images of the hide, the incision, the way the stripes matched the shoulder scar I'd mentioned nights earlier. We took a sample of hair and bagged it. The radio chewed a list of names and numbers into the thin air. The police were called. What the hide suggested more than any of our notes could make polite was a cruelty that organized itself around mimicry. It was not a crude, predatory act. It was a deliberate removal, a taking off of a skin and its placement as if to say, look, a stage had been set. Whoever or whatever had done this had the physical force to remove a hide and the patience to arrange it. Those two facts together removed any simple explanation of a scavenger mauling. When patrol officers arrived, their faces last night slicked with sleep and caffeine, they did what police do. They measured, they cordoned, they read the room for anything that could be used as probable cause. They asked the same practical questions. Was there any sign of forced entry? Had any feed been taken? Did anyone have motive? They wore the same neutral intercom of bureaucratic processing on their faces, as if to translate catastrophe into columns. Tom answered them in the same clipped way he'd used with us all night. His voice was steadier now, as if the adrenaline needed to do the job had returned with the arrival of more adults. The patrolman who took the lead, Officer Ruiz, moved with the careful compassion of someone who has seen houses with missing people. His questions avoided spectacle. He took notes, photographed the hide, bagged samples with a gloved discretion that made it real in a different register. This was now in the domain of accounts that could be read in a courtroom, if any court wanted to read it. Yet the cameras were still stubbornly useless in the one way that mattered. The yard camera had fogged and shown nothing the night before. After the rain, the feed had no footage that showed anything other than Pepper returning to the stall. The perimeter camera over the downed fence had a black smear over the exact moment the hoofprints started. The corridor camera that had shown me waving had no additional clarity beyond the weird double exposure of me in two places. Officer Ruiz asked about the CCTV archive, the server racks, the backup drives. We told him where to look. He left 2 officers with us and promised to loop in animal control, which meant higher-level bureaucrats and possibly the veterinarian. The zoo veterinarian arrived with a professional, practiced horror, Dr. Hannah Miles, efficient in the way people in medicine must be. She moved around the stall like an engineer, eyes quick and evaluating. She opened her kit and we watched protocols do the bulk of our emotional labor for us. She inspected the hide in the same quiet, considering manner, mentioning terms in a way that grounded the thing in anatomy. Subcutaneous plain, no major lacerations other than that primary seam, hair follicles intact. She touched the skin with a gloved thumb like someone testing the history of years. Weirdly clean, she said, and the 2 words made it official. She explained later, gently, because she knew the room, that a scavenger event doesn't usually present this way. Predators tear and ingest and leave parts. Scavengers scatter. This hid was removed and laid out. That tends to suggest human agency, or at least an agent with human-like care for staging. She took swabs for trace DNA and called the necropsy team. We braced for the thing no one wants to say, that the animal itself might not be present. And it wasn't. At least not in any way we could find. The body was absent. There were no deep gouges in the stall floor, no dragged carcass, no bones, nothing that pointed to a struggle in the stall itself. The hide had been peeled off elsewhere or removed from a carcass and then placed neatly in stall 4. We expanded the search to every storage shed, every loading bay, every animal handling trailer. A small team took a sweep of the service roads around the perimeter. They looked under bridges, in culverts, inside the small maintenance trailers, where people had been known to hide things. They found nothing. The absence of evidence felt like a presence in its own right, something deliberate. Take only what you intend to show, leave nothing that could be used to prove you were there. Interviews followed. We were each asked to recount in careful chronological order what we'd been doing and where we'd been. JJ told his corridor sighting story to a tape recorder that smelled of damp cables. He sounded younger than he is on those tapes. The edge in his voice made words lean forward, as if they wanted to get out before they'd been draped in restraint. I told my version, stall, fence, yard, again and again until the repetition dulled the memory into a set of movements. The precinct did what precincts do: file a missing person style report, assign a case number, and then gently suggest that the most probable explanation was a human with access, someone on staff or someone who knew staff routines, who had taken the animal and hidden the body. It was a script I've seen rewritten at other organizations, someone with a motive acting under cover of weather. They suggested an insurance scam or a prank that went too far. I remember the way those alternatives landed. Thin, bureaucratic, wrong. If someone had wanted to steal Pepper, why leave her halter? Why stage the hide in the stall? If a person had done it, they would have been sloppy, or they'd have wanted the meat, or they'd have made off with the entire thing. What we found suggested an intelligence that was curious about mimicry, not profit. Rumors expanded like mold. Teenagers who trespassed, disgruntled former employees, a group of pranksters who liked to post viral stunts. Friends and acquaintances suggested 1,000 stories, some of them kind and some cruel. The zoo board, with its reputation to protect, leaned toward the mundane explanation and away from headlines. PR drafted a statement about an unfortunate animal welfare incident, and the city veterinary public affairs officer suggested we wait for test results before making an official public announcement. The official statement would later read like a careful incision, clinical, neutral, and meant to close a wound with a bandage. But the thing that a PR release cannot paper over was what the animals remembered. For weeks afterward, the big cats would not rest in the open yard on the east side. They preferred the shadows and the back walls, muscles coiled and ready. Caesar became more brooding than usual. The primates readjusted their small corpses of ritual behaviors, grooming more nervously. The staff rotated duties until no single keeper had to sleep in the same trailer as before. We rearranged our nights like people rearrange furniture after a storm, hoping it will change the way the house takes sound. I took a week of leave because my hands moved their own story. I could not sleep for long between the hours. In the small, tender gaps of rest, I dreamed of stripes folding like origami and of a little voice that said my name and the name of the animal it had borrowed. In the dreams, the thing wore animal skins like coats and tried them on in front of mirrors that were not mirrors. I would wake up, and the room would be full of the faint metallic smell I'd noticed in the stall. When I came back, the zoo had a tableau of interviews, press inquiries, a printed list of talking points. The necropsy report, when it finally arrived, was laconic and frustrating. They said the hide's histology didn't reveal immediate signs of trauma to the dermal layer. There were no traceable pollutants or obvious cuts consistent with tools like knives used in butchery. The DNA on the hide matched Pepper, but the samples that might have belonged to the rest of the body, blood remnants, connective tissue, were absent. They concluded nothing they could put as fact in a public release. The language of the report was hedging and competent, suggestive of human removal, but not demonstrative. In the end, the line between a carefully staged human act and something stranger could not be crossed with the evidence they had. Media vultures flocked to the story in their own way. Their headlines favored the uncanny. "Zebra skin found after bizarre zoo breach," they wrote, over close crops of stripes and interviews with me in which my face did not betray what my chest carried. People called with conspiracy theories, with offers of help, with suggestions I didn't want. There were internet threads that suggested elaborate rituals or organ harvesting schemes. There were others that suggested viral hoaxes. None of them answered the two things that lodged in my skull and refused to go. 1. Why had the cameras been blind where we needed them most? 2. How had something mimicked a person so well that it could be mistaken for one in low resolution? And how had it used skins, animal and human seeming, to move through spaces designed for us? The police did their part. They interviewed the maintenance crew. They checked payroll records. They found no evidence of outside malfeasance and closed the more sensational leads in favor of unknown person with knowledge of the zoo. The zoo replaced some cameras, patched the fence, and issued a statement about increased security and the unfortunate loss of an animal. The board held a brief emergency meeting and then went about the long work of appeasing donors. We were told to keep calm. We were told to expect public scrutiny. We were trained to answer. We were not trained to process the sense that someone, or something, had taken an animal's skin and worn it like a suit. We were not trained for the idea that our own faces might be borrowed for a while by something else. Months passed. In the thin cold of a late autumn night months later, I was called back to the yard because a staffer had reported hair on a tool shed, a tuft of striped hair pinned to a nail in the wood like a mockery. We gathered in the rain again, as we had that first night. The ritual of officers, the small, polite shock of Dr. Miles, the careful containers. The tuft turned out to be ambiguous in its DNA results, some material matching equid hair, some external contaminants. Again, books could be written about what we didn't find. On nights when the wind was right and the lions were loud, I would hear like a memory pressed against the glass, a child's voice, and I'd flinch. Maybe it was the staff radio getting crosstalk from a far-off call. Maybe it was my own brain, which had been rewired by that night to watch for the impossible. Maybe the voice lived in the place where my certainty used to be, and it used the shape of names to find me. I rarely told anyone about those small intrusions, because they invited skepticism, and because language flattens dread. When you say, "I hear a child's voice," people ask for proof. Proof, of course, is precisely what the world had refused to give us that night. There were other oddities. An internal audit later revealed that several security camera backups had supposedly corrupted files from that night with the same static and rain smear pattern. The company that maintained our cameras said these events were coincidental and pointed to water damage. The maintenance crew, when pushed, said the older units had always been temperamental in torrential storms. We patched and replaced and paid invoices and adjusted staffing. Paperwork, as I learned, can be an anesthetic. A year passed. The city wanted to move on. The zoo board bought a new perimeter alarm system and instituted a rapid response protocol for animal absences. PR cycles churned, and the public attended a new baby giraffe's birth to cheer away memories. The hide and the hole in the timeline of that night receded from the official narrative in small bureaucratic increments. We, the people who had been there, did not move on in the same way. JJ took a transfer to the mammal facility at another zoo with slightly different hours. He said he needed to be somewhere daylight was plentiful, somewhere the animals' rhythms agreed more with the sun. Tom went up the ladder and supervised more daytime operations. For a time, he drank less and became almost entirely comfortable with meetings about fence budgets. Dr. Miles left for a research position and came back 2 years later with a book on equid health that never mentioned pepper. I kept working nights for a while, long after my stomach told me not to. There is something stubborn about people who work with animals. The animals are honest in ways humans are not. They do not conflate intention and pattern the way we do. They are safer teachers for the kind of truth that survives storms. So I kept going because leaving felt like an admission that the night had won, and because there were other animals who trusted my hands to guide them through rain. Every so often, when a storm hits and the east sector's fences are creaking, I stand at the same observation rail, where the lions had first fixed their gaze, and I watch for that wrong gait. I find myself scanning for seams, edges of skin that don't sit right and shoulders that bend wrong. Training has given me ways to read animals. Trauma has added a second set of eyes that look for mimicry. You should know this too. The thing didn't leave a calling card only for us. There were other reports in regional animal centers, odd thefts, animals returned without usual bruising patterns, unexplained gaps in video. None of them prove anything but the shape of a rumor. That something moved through animals wearing them, trying on skins like costumes at a child care center pageant. Those reports slide around the edges of official acceptance and then fold back into the night like paper birds, their wings clipped. The people who make stories of these things, internet sleuths and late-night hosts, have given the creature names. Skin wearer, I've seen, and the mimicker, and yes, someone called it a skinwalker on an online forum in a way that made me wince at the weight those words have for the cultures they come from. I will not do anything like that here. I have no claim to any origin story. I can describe behavior, the way it moved and what it seemed to prefer. I can tell you the lions saw it as wrong, that cameras failed to capture its passages in the crucial moments, that a hide was found arranged with something like respect in stall 4. What I will not do is turn it into a lecture on myth or appropriation. The power in this story, what made it most terrifying, was its refusal to fit into the categories we have. The hardest thing afterwards was the way people wanted neat narratives. Families wanted reassurance. The board wanted metrics. The media wanted spectacle. I wanted to know whether the thing had been a person or something else entirely. In the absence of that knowledge, you either fill the gap or you live with it. I chose, slowly and with a lot of sleeplessness, to live with it. Sometimes late at night I think about the small practicalities that haunted us. The downed fence left like a tooth at the edge of our property, the camera that showed me twice in 2 places, the child's voice layered over an older croak, the hide folded like something intimate. Each of those things could be a coincidence stretched fine enough to break the fabric of explanation. Or each could point to a pattern we could not understand, an intelligence that learns to fit in by appropriation, that moves through skins like people go through coats. I never saw it take off a skin. I never saw a person with stripes that were peeled away. What I saw was the aftermath, the thing moving with human attention to procedure, the hide carefully arranged, the cameras refusing to witness certain passages, as if someone had closed their eyes at the exact second they needed to look. If you work with animals, you get used to a particular kind of grief, accidents, natural death, unavoidable euthanasia. You grieve and you carry on because the animals need the care of living hands. This grief was a different kind. It is the quiet sensation that something you thought of as stable can be borrowed and taken. It is the feeling of your certainties being worn like an ill-fitting garment. So what do I want you to take away from this? Not a declaration of truth. I'm not in the business of claiming absolute proof. I want the weight of caution. I want you to imagine the vulnerability of places we take for granted as safe. A zoo is a house for animals. It is also a set of human systems designed to hold other beings. Those systems can fail, not only because of maintenance budgets or storms, but because of things that don't respect the categories those systems protect. People have asked me if I still believe in the mundane explanation, human sabotage, a vandal, some elaborate theft. I remain open to that possibility in the small, pragmatic way a scientist remains open to alternate hypothesis. If someone had motive, if someone had access, it could have been staged. But I have to account for the animals that reacted as if they had seen something wrong. I have to reckon with the corridor footage that complicated my position. I've learned to hold both those possibilities, and none of them feel comforting. You can tell yourself one of the stories that makes the most sense to you. You can read hospital reports and necropsy notes and call technicians to ask about camera failure, and then decide what sits best with your sense of the world. I have friends who moved away from their shifts and never looked back. I have others who doubled down and stayed because the animals needed adults who would not be cowed by rumor. As for me, I still go back sometimes on bad weather nights to the east sector. I check the fence lines with fingers that know the map of splintered wood and bent wire. I look for the seams in a way that's practical, and in a way that's a kind of ritual, a method of staying alive in a place that has shown me how flimsy our safeties can be. There are nights when the radio brings static that sounds almost like voices. There are nights when I swear I see a striping in a shadow and call in a patrol only to find a drunk raccoon rootling in the trash. Every human story needs an ending. This one refuses it. The hide was found and logged. The explanations offered were plausible and incomplete. The system patched what could be patched. The cameras were replaced. But I cannot tell you the thing is gone. I can only tell you I watched a skin laid out like an offering, and I watched a fence torn, and I heard a voice that was 2 voices at once call a name belonging to one of our animals, and a line in me shifted. If you take anything from this, Let it be that the border between the known and the unknown is thinner than you think, and sometimes that border is walked by entities that do not respect the categories you live by. Keep your animals close, keep careful logs, and above all, listen to the little things, the ears and the breathing and the rhythm of a tale. Those are the honest measures in a world that's always trying to teach us new shapes of fear. If you want more accounts like this, stories told by people embedded in their fields, by keepers and nurses and first responders who watched what the cameras couldn't, please subscribe. There are more nights, more storms, and more misreadings of the dark than you would suspect. And if you work in a place with animals, keep an eye on the seams. The thing that wears a skin respects a pattern. Learn the pattern, and you give yourself a chance. Thanks for listening. I don't offer conclusions, I offer witness. The day a skinwalker, or whatever you prefer to call it, invaded our zoo, is the night the lines we've always trusted began to blur. We patched what we could and kept watch. We counted hoofprints and handprints and questions, and we still can't say for sure what exactly walked off into the trees wearing stripes like someone trying on a face. So ask yourself, if the cameras didn't catch it and the people couldn't account for it, what else do you trust to tell you what is real?